question, is that really the best way to do this? Is it really wise to say, we're going to put a lot of kids on the street at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon when very few working parents are actually around, and say to them, you finish the rest of these children's education, because that's sort of how we've always done it? Or should we say, as many other countries do, and as some schools in America now do, why don't we do the whole job for these children and send them home at 5, 4 or 5, we could debate the details, right? But send them home when the job is done. And by the way, I personally, this is a whole huge issue, would include in that doing a whole lot more of what's called homework right now in a school setting and a whole lot less of it at home. I mean, homework is a funny thing. Now, in many of our schools that we're working in that are high poverty schools, no homework gets done anyways. So if you don't do it at school, it doesn't happen at all. That's not a problem in Newton. Newton kids go home and slavishly, by and large, do their 2 or 3 hours of homework, which the schools tell you is less usually, but the parents tell you is more. And I have kids who do exactly this, right? And a lot of that, is questionable in how valuable it is. If as the kids get older, if there's any issues or questions they have, few parents are really, able to sort of help their kids or tutor them, or at least understand for sure what the teacher had in mind, right? So many of our schools, in fact, and many schools that use more time, do more of those same things, practicing 10 math problems, right? Your kids will go home with 10 math problems. First of all, some kids only need 2 because they're getting it. The 10 is just, let's give everybody 10. If your kid's not getting it after 1 or 2, what are they going to do? Quit? Ask you for help? I mean, how are they going to progress on this, right? Whereas if you do it in school where there's someone there who can help, another student, the teacher, somebody, the odds of success are better. If you ask educators, is it better to practice something you just learned right after you just learned it, or 6 hours later or a week later? It's obvious what the answer is. You reinforce right away. I also want to emphasize what we need and want schools to do more of is individualize for our kids. So I'm not for every kid getting the same thing except for more hours every day. In addition to having enough time to do the job better, and in addition to having enough time to do more for kids, almost every school that I know of with an significantly expanded learning time calendar and schedule has more chance to individualize for kids. And I think that's one of the wrong things with our current system. It's out of a factory model where you take every 5th grader and you say from 10:42 to 11:31 you're a math student in this classroom. You all get treated like a batch on the factory. That 42 minutes is your math for today, and then we move you to the social studies section of the factory, right? Well, for some kids it's not enough. For some kids it's hellishly boring. For some kids, they'd want to go further in it. I mean, it's not where we should be in terms of education. We need to be at the level kids are at. Some kids need significantly more time, but can get it. Some kids need to be significantly more challenged and don't need to sit around listening to, the repetition that the other kid needs. So part of changing our notion of time and learning, in my opinion, is making sure that we have enough time for the kids who need more time and enough challenge and diversity and exploration for the kids who need more of that, enough project-based and experiential learning for kids to get their hands on things, not just a teacher to teach at the front of the class, enough time to not say it's music or math, but music and math, enough time, and I want to emphasize this too, and I think you'll hear this from these folks, enough time for teachers to collaborate too. So as part of the model we advocate when we get to specifics, we advocate more time for students and teachers, and that teachers use some of that time to learn together more, to collaborate, to talk about the same students, so that the 5th grade teachers are all talking about the student together and talking about their work and figuring out how to work together better. The math department's working together to improve their practice. These are things that advanced schools do more of, and I think Newton's probably got some great models of that. But if you ask teachers, is there enough time in the day to do that well today, they would say no. They need more time if they're going to do that. So, the teachers need that time too. The pace of school needs to feel more appropriate to the adults and kids. So one parent once their teacher made the comment to me that I'll know I have it right if right now at the end of the day, she said the kids burst with energy out the door and I feel like I'm so tired I can hardly move. The right day, I'd feel okay because the pace went well and the kids are so tired they just want to go home and they've really been going at it, right? I don't know if that's exactly the right analogy, but I thought it was an interesting thing to think about the pace of school often. Why I really salute what you're doing here is we have a model we're pursuing in Massachusetts. There are 26 schools that have volunteered to come forward and say we want to try this out and see if it can help our kids. The early data is very encouraging about what it's doing for kids academically in the core, what it's doing for kids in terms of exciting them about learning, about giving them a broader array of things to do, what it's doing for teachers and their ability to feel satisfied that they're able to help the kids succeed. I mean, the data so far, as I say, is very encouraging. But most of those schools, and I think this is a school that comes closer to Newton, most of those schools face a different set of challenges than I think Newton does. Most of those schools face a set of kids many of whom will drop out if they follow the trajectory of their older peers, many of whom will never have the basic skills to even go to college and so forth. So I'm not suggesting that the model be one-to-one applied to you in Newton. But I do think that if you want to think long-term, not this year, my kid tomorrow, but where do I think schools will be and should be in 2020, which now seems a lot closer than it did when we called our organization Mass 2020. If you want to look out to a time like that, I do think most of you could probably accept the proposition that continuing to do things in education as we did them ourselves and our parents and our grandparents, considering how the world is changing and the challenges are changing, the expectations are changing, is probably not the right thing. In a really good dialogue about what would be the right thing and more experimentation with what works for kids and parents is what we need to do. And why I'm particularly passionate to be here tonight in Newton about this is, frankly, it's going to take civic leadership to challenge these things because, there's a lot of comfort with the system as it is for many of the people involved in the system as it is. I'm not pointing any finger when I say that. One of the reasons people like this are heroes to me is, I think I peeked over your notes and noticed I think you've been teaching there 20 years. You're going to say, I'll steal your first point. For someone who's taught 20 years, any of us who've done anything professionally for 20 years, to bite off as big a change as you've bitten off, and the teachers at all of our schools have, speaks to your desire to succeed. That's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to really deeply change your work practice that much. Most of us don't really want to keep up with every new change that's out there because at some point you feel like, I like it as it is. I don't want to learn something new. So it is important that there be civic dialogue to push this point. And quite frankly, everywhere I go, I just came back from the meeting of the commissioners of the 50 states for education. Mitchell Chester, our commissioner, was there, and the other 49 commissioners. They invited us to come out and speak about this. A lot of other states are looking at this. Everybody looks to Massachusetts as the absolute leading place in the country on K-12 education. We may look at our flaws. Every place else, they're like, you're from Massachusetts. That's the top acme. And the data is we are the highest achieving place in the country. And within Massachusetts, Newton is one of the handful of places everybody would point to and say, if I could move to Newton, I would move to Newton because your schools are so good. So if you're having genuine ferment about what is the right structure for schools, you are not only doing the right thing, quite frankly, for your kids, you're doing the right thing for the education improvement movement in America. For the best of the best to actually be also saying, why be satisfied with where we are? Why can't we do more and better? Is important. Don't rest on your laurels. Challenge the orthodoxies and say, can we do different and better? I'll close with one last point. As you think about time and learning, I think there are some things I would be thinking about Newton about time and learning that are quite different than just simply what we're doing at elementary and middle schools in Framingham and elsewhere. Okay, I'd be thinking about also changing at the high school level time and learning, but probably in some very different ways. The single biggest complaint of suburban kids in American high school is they're bored. They're sitting in classes, they're bored. If you talk to the higher achieving kids in Newton, a lot of them will tell you they're bored. And that's because they're sitting in lecture classes, okay? So, I'm for changing and experimenting in time and learning. I would tell you that I've seen a few high schools in America that are really breaking the mold. And their mold for those kids in particular is way less classroom time, way more project-based exploratory kind of learning, way more self-paced learning, and let kids grow as fast as they're capable, not adhere to 42 minutes block, period after period after period. Now, that's not something that is part of what we're doing here. It's not something that I hold any particular great expertise on. My main goal in life is to throw some bricks at what we have today and say, it's the factory. Everyone gets the same. Go through the process. Seat time equals what it means to progress is no more appropriate for the oldest kids who are at the highest level than it is for kids who need the basic skills or anybody else. So I encourage you to challenge those orthodoxies at every level and in every way, not just the way you'll hear about in a minute.